Man, this SRO is good, but it's missing something.
More reticles.
Hey, what's going on today, fellas? Welcome back to the channel. It's your host, Paul, again, and today we're back to shooting some pistol. So let me ask you guys a question. If you're looking for a pistol dot, what exactly are you looking for? In my opinion, if you're competing for score and you want to shoot fast and accurate, you probably want something as bright as possible in the biggest glass as possible. So having said that, you're probably going to want something like this, right? The Trijicon SRO, the most popular dot right now in all practical shooting. So it makes sense if you really look at it, right? It's got bigger glass than its close cousin, the RMR, and it's got the durability that you're going to look for high-speed shooting. But as usual, things don't stay the same very long, so Holosun's coming out with their version of the competition dot, the 507 Comp. The 507, remember, was one of the original ones that could switch reticles, and that fulfilled a lot of different roles, right? But for this one, it's got in its name, Comp. They're aiming this squarely at the carry optics competitors. And by the way, just FYI, both of these optics, both the SRO and S507 Comp, are my personal ones. So you've seen this SRO many times on this channel. We looked at it earlier on pistols, and also we've shot this on offset rifle sights as well, so it's seen a lot of rounds. So after having spent some time with that 507 Comp, I can tell you that that thing has some features that the SRO lacks. So that's gonna make it a very strong candidate to unseat this as a champ, depending upon what you're looking for. So we're gonna expand upon that further right now. We're gonna take a closer look at the externals, and then we'll work our way towards the internals. All right, fellas, so if the 507 Comp is the bigger and maybe better SRO, there are a few profile differences I wanna mention. And the first one, you guys that run the SRO, you guys already know this, that the SRO is actually longer than the 507 Comp. And the reason why that's so important is since it sits closer to the ejection board, you'll get like brass hits on the glass. Not enough to break it or chip it. Also, you'll get a carbon residue on this from all the gas spraying on the lens, right? Which you gotta wipe off every once in a while. The 507 Comp does not have this issue, so you look at it, it sits much further back and it just sits taller and flatter right here. So to the primary difference profile-wise between these two, the 507 Comp glass is quote-unquote bigger. So if you were to Google the specs on this, the Trijicon SRO glass is taller while the Holosun glass is wider, right? Does that make a difference? Well, spec-wise, they're pretty close. But firsthand, after shooting it some, I can say that it does help quite a bit to have that wider glass versus the taller glass of the SRO, in my opinion. Generally, it's a little bit easier for our eyes to look at things that are wider than they are taller, like that kind of rectangle shape. If you look at your eyes, they're actually wider than they are taller, right? If you look at a movie screen, it looks wider than it is taller, right? So I think that's kind of one of the reasons why you have the whole EOTech versus Aimpoint field of view difference, right? So, because the EOTech is just a little bit easier to look through as far as shape. So that's just my theory. I'm throwing it out there. Just take that for what it's worth. Okay, so since we're talking externals, take a quick look at the controls. All right, fellas, so even though Trijicon's glass is smaller than the 507 Comp, when it comes to the controls, it's the exact opposite because everything on the Trijicon is bigger. So starting with the adjustment controls in the back on the SRO, the ones on the Trijicon are bigger and nicer. They're a little bit easier to read. They have better lettering. And also when you're turning them, you can hear the clicks a little bit more positive. And speaking of big, I think the biggest difference between them are the brightness knobs on the left and right of the SRO. On the 507, they're just stacked right next to each other on the left-hand side. The SROs are much bigger, so they're a little bit easier to find. However, one thing that kind of annoys me about Trijicon is it made these super stiff to push. Once you get them going, you'll feel the click, but when you compare it to the 507, which clicks very easily, the SRO is kind of a pain in the ass. And lastly, we'll talk about the battery tray real quick. The SRO comes with a top-mounted battery tray, so versus its cousin, the RMR, which had a bottom battery tray. So that's great about this. The only thing that's kind of annoying is if you try to put a coin or a screwdriver in here, you kind of have to come in at a weird angle to undo this. The 507's battery tray is on the side though, so you will have to use that small Holosun tool to get it out, but I think it's a little bit easier to change the battery tray than 507 Comp versus the SRO. All right, fellas, so we're done talking externals. Now we're gonna take a close look at the internals in the glass where it really counts. All right, fellas, so when we're talking glass quality, generally it's not as important on a pistol sight versus a rifle sight since distances are shorter, the glass is smaller, and typically when you're shooting with a pistol sight, you're looking kind of through it, almost like an occluded rifle sight. Having said that, if you have a lens with some distortion and it's causing your target size or shape to distort as it's moving through the lens, that can be kind of annoying and a little bit distracting. So for the SRO, I think distortion is pretty well controlled for most part. The centers are really clear, so as long as you're directly pointing at the target, you won't really notice it. But as you move toward the outside edges, maybe the last 20% or so, you'll get a little bit of warpiness and the image bends a little bit. And as far as tinting for the lens, there is quite a bit of blue on the SRO. It's not too bad. It's really only noticeable when the sun's coming in through the front of the lens. But for the 507 comp, I think the distortion is better controlled than the SRO. It's a little bit clearer, especially noticeable since, you know, obviously the surface area is bigger because the lens is bigger, and you really have to move to pretty much to the edge of the glass before you see any distortion around that lens. Now, where the 507 doesn't do as well as the SRO is its color tint. So this optic has a very strong bluish green tint. So the coating they use in this is really strong, so you're gonna notice it most when you're like in shadow and shooting out into a well-lit area. And speaking of that reticle brightness, if you were to crank up the brightness from both these to maximum power, I would have a hard time choosing which one of these is the brighter of the two. I think whether you pick the SRO or the 507 on a super bright sunny day, they're gonna be more than bright enough for your needs. By the way, since we're talking maximum brightness here, you do have to think about reticle glare on both of these. So on the SRO, I think the reticle glare is more well controlled than the 507. You don't see much of it on the lens, despite which direction you're having the sun hit the lens. However, for you guys that use SRO for a long time, you know that when the sun is low, you're gonna have that second sunspot of a reticle. So if it's dusk or dawn, like it is right now, just aware that that's gonna happen and make sure you're shooting at the right dot. But for the 507, it's the reverse of that. So basically, the LED housing, the reticle glare is pretty bad depending upon which direction you're pointing your gun. So personally, I would run the brightness down on just 1 notch to minimize that. However, if you're pointing the gun at the sun or dusk or dawn, it doesn't have that second sunspot like the SRO does. So since we're talking aiming points and the reticles, let's talk about the main feature that separates these two. So for the SRO, while the reticle is clear and bright and pretty much everything you want, you only get 3 different choices of reticles, right? You got the 1 MOA dot, 2.5 MOA dot, and the 5 MOA dot. I think the 5 MOA is almost the perfect compromise for the precision needed for a long shot versus reticle large enough that you can see while you're tracking it and recoil. So no matter the distance, whether 10, 15, 25, or 50 yards, I think you can hit pretty much any practical size target that's offered to you. However, you don't like the reticle size, you're kind of stuck with it. So if you want another reticle, you basically have to buy another SRO, right? But Holosun, they took a different approach.
All right, we got white, black, Spanish, yellow, we got hot, cold, we got wet, we got smelly.
Okay, did you guys keep track of all that? So let's just quickly review, right? So there's 8 total reticle choices in this one. So for the 507 comp, you start with the 2 MOA dot, then you have the 3 circles, 8 MOA circle, 20 MOA circle, and 32 MOA circle. And then you circle back and you do the circle dot combinations. You got the 2 MOA dot plus 8 MOA circle, 2 dot plus 20 circle, 2 dot plus 32 circle. And the last reticle is a combination of several of those. You got the 2 dot, the 8 circle, and the 32 circle. So you got all that? Okay, so Holosun really went crazy on the reticles with this one, but if there's one thing I learned from talking optics all these years is that optics are super highly individualized. I learned that when I did the 509T review and I saw the circle only option. I said, hey man, who's gonna use this reticle? And it turns out from the comments, people were like, hey idiot, that's my reticle. So when it comes to choosing your reticle, it's always a balance of, hey, this is a fine point that I need for the precision, but I need a reticle large enough to where I can see it in recoil and where I can see it as I'm moving the gun around. Out of all these reticles, these 8 reticles, I think these are probably the most popular ones. Okay, so the first one is probably the simplest and cleanest one, is the 2 MOA dot. Now that thing is super small. For a 2 MOA dot, this does bloom quite a bit, so it's a little bit easier to see in that instance. I don't think a ton of people are gonna use this. However, a 2 MOA dot is really good for zeroing. So if you zero this thing at 2 MOA dot, no matter what any other option you have, it's gonna be right on. It's gonna be very precise. Okay, so I think the second choice is likely gonna be the most popular, which is gonna be the 2 dot plus 8 MOA circle, or just the 8 MOA circle by itself. And to tell you the truth, when I looked at them, I could not tell the difference. But looking between 2 plus 8 or just 8 by itself, because the 2 is just so small. So I was like, hey, which one of these has the dot inside it? I don't know. So whether you pick a dot or not, I think the 8 MOA is a really close compromise to the 5 MOA dot that you find on the Trijicon SRO. A 5 would have been like the better choice, Holosun, to tell you the truth. But 2 plus 8 or 8 by itself is pretty good. And even if you were to do a walk back drill on that, even at 50 yards, you can still make headshots with it. So there's plenty of accuracy for practical shooting. And the last reticle, which I found kind of surprising as far as liking it when I started shooting with it, was the 20 MOA circle. So 20 MOA is not too large for a pistol dot, and it doesn't have a center dot to find it distracting. So basically you use it to just bracket targets. And the size of targets, even at 50 yards, a 20 MOA dot is not that big. So if I were to do a speed match with steel targets or whatever, I think a 20 MOA circle would be a very good reticle for that. Okay, so no matter which reticle you choose, I think we can all agree on one thing. What is up with that last reticle? The 2 plus 8 circle plus the 32 circle. Because typically you only need the big circle to find it when the sight's moving quickly, and then you need the small inner circle for precision. So why the 3 ring? So does anyone know? I mean, if I saw a dude running this in a match, is that guy the next Elon Musk genius, or he's just a crazy person? So if you're running this reticle, definitely let me know in the comments, because I think the shooting world needs your unique perspective. All right, fellas, so we're back at the beginning again. So for final thoughts, if you look at the pricing of both of these side by side, it's pretty clear that the Trijicon SRO is not as competitive as Holosun 507 comps. Of course, it's American made, so keep that in mind. Let's just be honest, a lot of guys will choose the 507 just because of that pricing alone. And outside of that pricing, if you saw in the earlier video, the 507 comp has features that the SRO doesn't have, so it's very compelling a choice. Is there any reason why I would recommend SRO over a 507 comp right now? Probably not, unless hey, the SRO is from Trijicon, it's a known brand, and it's got great warranty, so we know that dot's gonna last. Having said that, I think if you're an SRO now, I don't think you're gonna swap out the 507 comp just for the larger window, but if you had a new gun and you don't have a dot on it, I'd suggest you get a 507 comp and run it back to back against your SRO. Time it and see if that makes any performance difference to you. Because if you look at the About tab of this channel, it's all about performance here. And that's all I got for you today, fellas. Hopefully you found it helpful. And if you did, please leave a like and comment so this small channel can keep growing. Thanks again, and we'll see you guys again next time.